Let me start by saying welcome to all of you at Northgate and Madras and everybody watching online. We're glad you're here. We're in this series about making better decisions, and as you can tell, it's called wisdom. And what we've been doing for the last several weeks is we've been learning how to apply God's wisdom to the decisions of our life. And one of the next steps we've been asking you to take is that you would begin to read the little book that we've been studying together called the Book of Proverbs, which is in the older part of the Bible. And the great thing about reading this book together is that you can read just one chapter a day, and you just start on whatever day of the week or the day of the month it is, like today, for instance, would be the 19th. You read Proverbs 19, and then you just take the next one every day, whatever day you're reading. At the end of the month, on the 31st, on November 1st, you go back and start again. And if you're with us and you're not really a Bible person or not a church person, and one of the reasons is because you're not so sure about God or the supernatural or anything about that. The great thing about the book of Proverbs is there's no miracles, there's no supernatural in the book of Proverbs. It's just a collection of wisdom that God has for us to how to do life. And I believe that if you'll begin to read this book, you'll notice that there are things that apply directly to your life that you'll say, man, I can incorporate that and it make your life better. And we're hoping that as you do that, you'll begin to understand a little bit about what God wants for your life and how good that is for your life. Now, today, one of the pieces of God's wisdom that we're going to talk about is one of those that when I begin to talk to you about it, you're immediately going to see how this applies to your life. And it's one of those things that if you will incorporate it in your life, it will immediately make a difference in your life. And I can say that with full confidence in everybody's life. And I just need to say that as I begin to talk about this, it's going to be one of those things that I believe most of you are going to fully agree with. In fact, you're going to know someone that this applies to. Many of you have kids that are on the student retreat this weekend. You're going to wish that they had been here to hear this because you want it to get in deeply ingrained in your life, or you have a family relative that you immediately think needs to hear this, or somebody that you work with. There will be a point in this message where you'll go, yes, that's right. I wish so-and-so could hear this message. And you'll think about that person and want to make sure that they get it to them some way. Because all of us have seen what the proverb is going to talk about today. We've seen it in other people's lives, and we wish that they could see it in themselves. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the wisdom of living your life with good old-fashioned initiative. What I want to talk to you about is the problem that's caused in our life, in our world, in our workplaces, in our culture, when laziness begins to take over. I frankly could point to you to dozens of people in my life that I know of who their life isn't going all of that well. And outside of complaining about it, about blaming it on God or the government or their parents or how they got diapered or something like that, outside of just mouthing complaints about how their life isn't going all that way, well, they aren't doing really anything to get at fixing the problem that is in their life. In fact, underlying the wisdom of this problem of laziness is what I would call classic wisdom is this thing called the someday factor. People who live with this thing of lack of initiative in their life, they have this kind of thing that runs through them that someday, somehow, some way, things will get better. Someday my marriage will get better. Someday my kids will get out of trouble. Someday drinking won't be such a problem for me. Someday my anger will get in control. Someday my finances will get better. Someday I'll have a job that I love. Someday my boss will get in line. Someday everything will be all right. Someday, somehow, some way, everything will take care of their place. I mean, you take whatever kind of problem somebody has, and someone has a someday kind of little slogan that goes along with that. The problem with that is that's just not how life works. Time doesn't heal things. Now, working on a problem that you have that caused a deep hurt in you may take some time. Going and confronting the person that hurt you, that takes some wisdom, and that may take time to fill it out. But time itself, it doesn't heal all wounds. Time won't fix your marriage. Time won't fix your problems. Time won't fix your addiction problem. Time won't get you out of debt. The only thing that time does really well is time goes by way faster than you think it should, and it seats problems deeper in you than you ever thought were true. Now, if you're reading the book of Proverbs along with us for the last, in fact, you've made it all the way through if you started when we started this series now, If you've been reading it, you know that the book of Proverbs has this quaint little word that it uses for people who live with this someday kind of attitude. It's an antiquated word we don't use a whole lot, but I like it particularly. It uses a word for people who live with this someday attitude. It's the word sluggard. Isn't that a great word? Sluggard always makes me think of those little snail-like animals that don't move too fast and they don't get anywhere too much, those slugs. Well, Proverbs use that kind of phrase to talk about people who live with this someday, somehow, some way things will be okay kind of life. And it talks about it in such a way that it describes for us how we can see the danger of becoming sluggards in our own life. In fact, the book of Proverbs, I think, describes kind of a downward digression chart for sluggards. The first step down the path toward sluggardliness in your life is when somebody postpones responsibilities that have, and they say, I'll do that later. I'll do that someday. Proverbs 6:10 says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to the rest. What's the result of that? Poverty will come on you like a thief and scarcity like an armed man. Generally, the writer says, anytime you have a responsibility that you know is yours and you say, what's the hurry with that? I'll do that later. I'll get around to that someday. I'll take a nap first. Let me check my Twitter feed, post on Facebook, take a photo and put on Instagram. I'll postpone doing what is a necessary task for the sake of I'll get around to that sometime later. When you do that, you are in danger of becoming a sluggard. The second stage down the progression chart of sluggardliness is the making of excuses. You're going to work one day and you realize that there's an especially tough challenge. You've had a project that's coming due and you don't really know how to conquer it. Instead of praying up if you're a follower of Christ, instead of amping up and getting your energy ready and you face that charge head on, instead, the person on the digression chart of sluggardness begins to make a kind of excuse. I just don't want to face that today. In fact, I may not even go into work today. I love the way Proverbs 22:13 describes it. The sluggard says, there's a lion outside. I'll be killed in the public square. I think that's just Old Testament language for the dog ate my homework. It's just, you listen closely to the excuses that people make for not doing what they know they ought to do. It's just about as well-founded as, hey, there's a lion in the street and I'll get eaten if I go out there. When you find yourself starting to make excuses for why you didn't get something done that you knew was your responsibility, when you excuse your lack of performance, or you excuse your lack of initiative or diligence, when you take what you know you could have done, should have done, but you didn't get it done, and you make an excuse for why you haven't, it's just simple lack of initiative. And God's wisdom is that the making of excuses and postponing responsibilities is a slippery slope that leads you to a life of laziness. Proverbs goes on to say it this way: this is the eventual state of someone who's done this long enough. Proverbs 26:14. As the door turns on his hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed, just turning over and over, waiting for something else to happen. I'll show you one more proverb to get at the final digression of this lack of initiative in a person's life. Proverb 24:30. I passed the field of a sluggard, and I looked at the vineyard of a man lacking sense. Behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. The surface of the ground was covered with weeds. Stone walls were broken down. I saw it, this person says. I reflected on it, and I received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty comes like a robber and want like an armed man. This is just a picture of a life in ruins. A man walks by someone's field and he sees the walls are torn down, there's thistles grown up. And the picture is of a diligent man that's walking by, and he's well tended his crops. He's well taken care of his ground. He's mended his fences. He's got everything in place. And when he's walking by, he sees the digression that's taken place in the life of his neighbor, and he thinks to himself, now, his soil was just as fertile as mine. He had the same amount of time in the day that I had. He has the same ability I have, but his life looks like that, not because he couldn't have done anything. He just folded his hands, he made excuses, and eventually his whole life is in this kind of disrepair. If you read the book of Proverbs, and I hope you are, you will see that laziness in the eyes of God versus initiative, and you'll learn that the consequences are huge for living or becoming a sluggard. It's just huge in the digression that takes place in your life. Now, this is a point where some of you are saying, man, it is so good to finally hear somebody stand up and say this. I have been wanting to say this to my spouse, to my son, to my cousin, to my brother-in-law. Boy, does he need to hear this. I'm going to figure out a way to get them this tape because they need to hear this. But you're also thinking about this point, this really doesn't apply to me very much because, I mean, if you look around at most of us that are here we are at church on a Sunday, or you're joining in with us. For many of you, your portable campuses, you got up, you early, you set up, you helped everything get in place, and you're thinking for most of us, my problem is not I'm too lazy. I mean, right? That's what you wind up thinking. Some of you are saying, hey, Ed, come on by my house. My wall isn't broken down. My yard's in perfect repair. I don't lay and spin on my bed like a door turns on its hinges. I'm up. I'm trying to get at it. And I know you're right. And I'd say the same thing about my life. But let me tell you what I've noticed about the digression that takes place in a lot of our lives who, for the most part, we have it really all together. It's not full-blown sluggardliness that's the problem. It's selective sluggardliness, which is pretty dang hard to say. Selective sluggardliness. It's the problem that in one or two areas of our life, we allow laziness to creep in. It doesn't really take full-blown being a sluggard to take over your life. See, I stumbled on it right there. It's areas that are vital that you just don't take initiative in. It's the dad or the mom who sets records at work and their boss loves them and everybody thinks they knock it out of the park at the work, but they give their spouse and kids leftovers. I mean, of their time and their energy, and people wonder where they are. It's a person who pours themselves into making sure that everything's good at the job and at home, but they put no effort into their relationship with God. They put no energy into what's going to happen, and they think someday, somehow, that'll just take care of itself. It's a man or woman who gets really careless in their budget, and they think somehow I'll get a raise. One day I won't have many expenses. Someday, somehow, this will all take care of itself. And all it does is time takes place, and then you don't work anymore. You're retired, and you have the same issues in your life. Someday never comes. Selective lack of initiative, it can be just as deadly if the area you are selectively lazy in winds up being one that ruins your life. And because of us, so many of us are motivated in so many areas of our life, what winds up happening is we give so much energy that we go, look, man, I am knocking it out of the park in 9 out of 10 areas. I just need a break in this one area. It wasn't too long ago that I wound up talking to a dad. I've known him for a number of years. He's a great guy. He's a follower of Christ. And I mean, he's a guy that if you looked at he and his wife, nobody would ever think that they're lazy. But I had noticed that their attendance at church was slipping a little bit. And, you know, if he wants to get a little loose in his relationship with God, that's one thing, and I could have a conversation with that. But they have kids. They have little kids that are dependent on them for them coming to know God and to get the spiritual side of their life in line. So he and I are talking one day, and I just said to him, I said, hey, I miss seeing you around. And he as much owned up and just said, hey, you know, there's really no excuse for it. We just get, you know, sometimes we just feel like resting on Sunday morning. We just don't get up and get it done. And I said, you know, if it was just you and your wife that we were talking about, that's one thing, and that's a problem, and we could go at it. But, you know, I know you're a follower of Christ, and maybe that'd all work out somehow, but hey, I remember being when you couldn't have kids, and y'all wanted kids, and we prayed that you would have kids, and when you had kids, we all thought it was a gift from God that you got these kids in your life, these precious little kids that God blessed you with. And now you have them, and you've gotten lazy about making sure that they can come to Community Kids, and you know that the problem is that they don't like it. They love it when they come. They're engaged when they come. They have people that are helping them come to go know God. And it's one thing if you get lazy and don't show up, but your laziness affects them. And I'm telling you, one day you're going to regret how your laziness in this one area wound up impacting them. What if it impacts them for eternity? See, there's some areas of regret, there's some areas of laziness that all it takes one, and it ruins everything for you. I mean, most of us look at ourselves, honestly, we see we're doing pretty good, and we hear somebody talk about this, and we think of somebody else that needs it, but if you look underneath the really nice veneer of our life, there's generally a spot. There's generally that one pocket where we're not being very diligent, and sometimes it's the one that's going to bring us down. It's the one that's going to ruin us. So I want to show you one more thing from the book of Proverbs that would talk about this idea of being lazy or being a sluggard. It talks about the positive aspect of it. It's what the Bible would call diligence, applying diligence to your life. There's a classic passage on this in Proverbs 6. It says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores its provisions in the summer, and it gathers its food at harvest." The writer of Proverbs says, the ant knows that some things have to get done, and it makes sure that it gets them done. In fact, I think most of us smart human beings have something to learn. We could learn from, if we just take a chance and go to ant school for a minute. The first thing you could learn, if you would learn from the ant, is the ant could teach us some things about diligence, because the ant doesn't need any external prompting to get initiative done in its life. The writer says he has no chief, he has no officer, he has no one prodding, pleading, motivating him to do what needs to be done. The ant takes initiative on its own and just gets it done. The other thing that we could learn from the ant is the ant knows what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. It says the ant works hard in the summer so that in the winter it has something to store up, it has something ready. He knows what to do, and he gets it done when it needs to be done. He doesn't postpone activity, he doesn't fold his hands, he doesn't sleep by, he doesn't make any excuses about why he's not doing this activity because it's a little too hard. He knows what's got to be done, and he gets at getting it done. I mean, honestly, in some areas of my life, I have a lot to learn in ant school from the wisdom that God talks about, the diligence of these little creatures. And I hope you have enough honesty and humility to admit that maybe there's an area or two in your life where you need to learn some diligence. So what I want to do in ending up this message today is I want to ask you to hear about one or two arenas of your life. What I'm going to do for the next few minutes, and I'm going to take a little bit of a risk, I'm going to ask you that as I talk about one or two different areas of your life and mine, here's the risky part. I'm going to ask that everybody joining in with us as I talk, that you do a little prayer exercise. What I'm asking you to do is for the next few minutes that you have one ear open to what I'm saying, but then you turn the other ear toward heaven and you begin to ask God, is this something that you need to think about? And you can do this no matter where you are in your spiritual life. Even if you're just beginning and you're not even sure if there is a God, I believe that God will speak to us because the Spirit of God is always moving. The Spirit of God is always drawing, and He speaks just as clearly to people who are just beginning their walk with God as He has with people who have been walking with Him for years. And what I'm asking you to do is that you just begin to say a prayer right now of something like, God, if there's something I need to hear, let me hear it. You just say in your spirit, God, speak so that I can hear it if this is something that I need to do. And as I talk about these different areas, I'm just going to ask if you feel a prompting, and maybe the prompting will be saying to you, no, you got that area covered. He's talking obviously to somebody else right now. You pray for them, but you don't need to take any more diligence than you already are in this area. But if while I'm talking you sense the Spirit of God saying to you, that's it for you. That's the area where you need to begin to make progress. I'm asking in just a few moments when we all come together and we talk about next steps, that you'll do whatever the Spirit of God prompts you to do. Deal? Okay, here we go. First, let me talk to you about the area of relationships. It might mean for you marriage, it might mean kids, it might be work relationships, it might be friendships, it could be dating relationships, it could be anything. Let me just make some comments about this for the next couple of moments and see if the Spirit of God says something to you about it. You know, the Bible says that the greatest legacy that a human being can leave on this earth is a legacy of love in the life of other people. For those of us who are followers of Christ, how we love other people, it is the defining mark of whether we're following Jesus or not. Not what we know, not what we believe, but how well we do at loving loving those particularly close in our relational world, our family, our friends, the people we work with, the people right around us, how we do at loving them. But let's be honest. In the midst of doing life in the real world, we bump into each other. We bruise each other a little bit. And it's way too easy just to say, even though that hurt a little bit, I'm just going to take that and I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm going to push it down. I'm going to let it go. And maybe someday, some way, somehow, that'll all get dealt with. Because it's a little too hard to say anything, and it feels a little vulnerable, and maybe I was wrong, and maybe they didn't mean it, and I'll just push it down. And pretty soon, there are these feelings roaming around. They're floating around in our relationship, and resentment begins to build up, and we say, well, I know I ought to say something, but I've waited too long, and I'll just push that down, and maybe someday, somehow, some way, our relation will get better. Because right now, it's just going to be too hard to do something. For some of us, this is the pocket of sluggardliness in your life. I mean, we give up way too easy in relationships. Somebody hurts us, and we get bruised, and we get lazy. And we don't reach out. We don't resolve conflict. We don't say, hey, that hurt a little bit. Can we talk about it? We don't say, hey, what did you mean about that? I don't think I understood it right. We don't even reach out, even in our own home, to make sure that everything gets unburied. We take the infection of the hurt and we push it down, and believing the lie that someday time just heals things. Time does not heal things. Work may take some time, but you're going to have to work. Some of you right now, honestly, all of your relationships are in good shape, and God is whispering to you right now, thank you for taking an effort to make love, and everything's okay. Pray for other people, but nothing's broken or a mess. But for others of you, right while I'm talking, a name or a face came to your mind. Someone in your home or somebody at work or a friendship that's got a little frayed. And love got pushed off to the side and resentment began to build. And God's saying to you right now, will you take initiative? The book of Romans, there's this verse that says, as much as it depends upon you, be at peace with everyone. Now sometimes you go and you take initiative and you try, and you can't get it done. The other person is unwilling. But, folks, it's been my experience that if you show relational diligence, if you reach out, most of the time the response on the other side is, hey, I want to work on this. I'm sorry we got a little crosswise. I want to try too. Thanks for the effort. Thanks for bringing it up. I just didn't have the courage to do it. And things begin to change. Do you need to take initiative in this area of relationships? Okay? How about work? Now, I know a lot of us work really hard, and we're highly motivated at work, and maybe right now God's already saying to you, whoa, you're already being fully diligent at work. You're putting more than enough energy in the marketplace. But others of us, maybe that's not so true. Could I just read something to you for a second? Colossians 3:23, the Bible says this, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord rather than for men. Question. Are you really giving your absolute best to work? I'm not just talking about energy. I'm talking about your best attitude. I'm talking about putting your best creativity into the task. I'm talking about bringing your full self to bear. I'm asking you, are you displaying your highest level of ethics and diligence and courage and character in the workplace? Are you showing genuine concern for people in the workplace? I've said again and again that Christians, we ought to be the best people at our workplace. That even if we work with people who don't believe what we believe, who don't do the things we do, that they look at us and say, I don't believe what they believe. I don't want to live the way that they live, but I hope I can hire 5 more of them. I don't think like they think. I don't believe about God like they do, but I hope my daughter sure marries one of those guys. Are you bringing your best to work? It opens the door for you to love people, and it cracks the door that you even may get the opportunity to talk to people about Jesus if you have a chance. Are you taking your best God-given abilities and are you applying yourself at work as if you're working for God, not just your boss? Let's just be honest. If you've been in the same job like I have been for a long time, it's easy to develop bad work habits. You learn how to get along and how to cut corners. You learn how to do just the minimums, to take the shortcuts, to engage in a little destructive kind of talk, to undermine the boss, to stir a little dissension up among other people, to self-promote a little bit, to make yourself look better in the eyes of other people. While I'm talking, some of you right now are hearing God talk to you and saying, hey, there's room for you to show a little more diligence at work. You need to stop all the negative talk. Hey, there's room for you to improve here. You're giving effort, but you're not giving your best. You got to take some initiative. You got to work with all your heart, even as if you're working for me. The Bible promises that diligence is rewarded. It's rewarded in the eyes of God. It's rewarded in the eyes of your coworkers. Diligence is rewarded in the workplace. Do you need to take any initiative in this area? Finally, let me talk to you about your relationship with God. Jesus tells this story one time that I'll paraphrase and I'll bring it into our culture a little bit. He talks about a guy who's really good at doing deals, and he's made a lot of money from doing deals, and he pours his life and energy into work, just like we talked about. He works and works and works and works, and all the time that he's working, there's a little voice in the back of his head saying, hey, you're doing great at work, but don't forget about God. Don't forget your life is more than just work. Pay attention to God and what God has to say in your life. And he thinks to himself, okay, someday, somehow, some way, I'll relate to God. But right now, I've got to do the deal. And then one day, the mother of all deal comes along. He's going to make a killing. He's going to be set up forever. And he thinks to himself, I've got to really pour my time. I've got to really pour my energy. I've got to pour everything into this. And all the time that voice is saying, wait a second. Think about God. Think about God today. Think about your relationship with him. Pay some attention there. But he's thinking, I will someday, somehow, but I've got to do the mother of all deals right now while I have a chance. And that night, he dies. And then as Jesus tells the story, he says about the man, here's the words that he says. That man was rich in work, but not rich toward God. And then he calls him this name. He says, he was a fool. That man was a fool for being rich in work, but never being rich toward God. Never giving any effort in his relationship with God. Never taking any initiative. Though the voice of the Spirit drew him and called him, he never gave any effort in building the relationship that the God of the universe wanted to have with him. He never put any effort in that kind of way. Jesus said, every human being has that potential. We only have a certain amount of initiative octane. You only have so much energy of what you can pour into something. He says, surely you need to pour it in your relationships. You definitely need to give your best at work. But you cannot forget about giving your best initiative to God as well. This guy was rich in one vein, and he died poverty-stricken in the one area that really mattered, his relationship with God. And now he goes into eternity to face God with nothing. He just got lazy in this one vital, important area. Is God saying something to some of you about that relationship that you need to take a next step? Let me direct your attention now back to our next steps that are on your connection card. Every week we ask you to take some initiative in this area. On the back of your connection card, we even provide a spot where you can commit. You can commit that you're going to take a step forward. Maybe as I've been talking, you've realized that there's a relationship that you need to take a step in, and you can just check that in a moment when the offering comes by and fold it and put it in there. And the good thing is we'll pray with you about that. You don't have to give a name, but you commit. We'll pray that God will help you as you take that step. Or maybe it was something at work, or maybe you need a next step in your relationship with God. Whatever you need, you take that step. One step we're hoping all of you who are Christ followers will take is that on the way out, you'll grab one of these bottles of water that talks about Water Day that's happening next week. It's an invitation. You can just hand to somebody and say, here, I want you to have this, and I hope you'll come with me next week. You take initiative to help somebody else think about the most important relationship in their life. Now, I know if you're here for the very first time that this all seems really pointed. Maybe you can even apply it in some areas, but the idea of filling out a card and giving us information, that feels too much to you. And I just say to you, if you don't want to do that, that's okay. You don't have to fill that out and drop it in. Maybe your next step is just to take the initiative to come back, because we don't think anybody came here, no one joined in by accident today. God's drawing you, and we hope you'll take a next step in that. So when the offering comes by, if you're comfortable letting us know that you're here, we'd love to know that. We just want to reach out and connect with you. Thank you for coming. We even have a gift for you on your way out by the information area. That it's a book that talks about the story of God throughout the Bible. It'll explain the whole story of the Bible. It'll help you in your spiritual life, we believe. We hope you'll pick that up. We're so glad you came. And when the offering comes by, if you'll put that card in there, if you want to, that's the only thing you need to put in there. This service was our gift to you, and we hope you'll take the gift of that book as well. You know, in the end, all of us need to take some step, because God has always been taking steps toward us. I believe that. See, the model of initiative is God himself. God creates the heavens and earth. He gives human beings everything, and then he steps back and he watches as we goof it up and we kill each other and we murder each other and we create cultures full of violence and that are me first, everything for me. And God could have just stood back and sat back on the couch in heaven and gone, okay, let's see what they do. How are they going to fix this thing? But instead, God himself took initiative to get us out of our mess. Jesus says in one of the books that talks about his life, a gospel called John, he says, for God so loved the world that he, sent the whole world to hell because it got screwed up, just stood back and watched and see what happened for God? No, God so loved that he gave. God so loved that he gave his only son. He took initiative. God's taken initiative in his relationship with you. And maybe today, if you're humble enough, you can sense that God's calling you. And maybe today, if you've never received Jesus, today's the day that you're receiving. There's even a place on your card that you can check. I want to pursue a relationship. I'm making a decision to follow Jesus with my life. If you put that in the offering today, we will reach out and help you take the next steps that God's asking you to take, to be baptized, to begin your life of following him. He took initiative, and he says to us, would you just show some back? Would you take a step toward me? I have met you way more than halfway. I mean, he sent Jesus to die on a cross for us, to provide eternity in heaven for us. I don't want to be a casual Christian. I don't want to be lukewarm at following him. I want to give him my very best. I don't want to respond to God with 2 pennies of energy when he's given me. I want to be rich toward God. I'm going to pray you do too. Let's bow together and I'll pray. Now, Father in heaven, I pray for these people that have joined in today. I thank you for the effort that they've given just to be here, just to join in on this message. And I pray that by your Spirit you've done what I could not do, that you've spoken to every heart. And you told us the area that we need to take. God, will you help us to take it? Help us to see that you've set the pace for initiative by sending your Son for us. For those of us that already follow him, that have already received his gift of eternal life, we are so thankful for that. We come now to remember him. In his name I pray. Amen.